Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. A very busy Tuesday on the Capitol as well as across the country. We're going to begin tonight in Washington in the political battle over whether or not to form a commission to investigate the January 6th riot. You would think this thing would be a no-brainer, but not for the party of Trump. I want to bring in senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. He's got the very latest for us. Andrew?
And Rich, Republicans in the Senate have already begun the procedural steps to filibuster the commission bill. Democrats say they'll force them into a procedural vote to put Republican members on the record. But in a surprise move, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, whose votes could lead to filibuster reform, just put out a statement pressuring Republicans to work out a deal. But if they won't, it appears the GOP does have the votes to filibuster the commission. Stay tuned. So let's dig into the GOP's top arguments against a commission and why one is so badly needed. Republican argument number one, that Democrats want a slanted commission just to make the GOP look bad.
I've made the decision to oppose the House Democrats' slanted and unbalanced proposal for another commission to study the events of January the 6th.
But the commission, as envisioned in the bill, is not biased. It was approved by the top Democrat and the top Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee, Democrat Benny Thompson and Republican John Katko. And Democrats conceded to every demand that Republicans made. Both parties equally represented, with each party picking members, equal subpoena power, and a firm end date, a report by the end of 2021. But perhaps the most digestible Republican argument against a commission is that the riot is already being investigated a lot.
You've got two committees in the Senate already doing their investigation.
Law enforcement investigations are ongoing, and federal authorities say they expect to arrest at least 100 or so more.
They're right. There are criminal and congressional investigations underway, but prosecutions of individual rioters from the FBI and the Justice Department are unlikely to produce information much beyond what the individuals themselves did and why they did it. And the Senate hearings have been focused more on Capitol security and other security responses. And those investigations are likely to get bogged down in politics and still won't answer the most important unanswered questions about the riot and what led to it, including, was law enforcement unprepared for the riot? And if so, why? A question that should include the National Guard's response. The Capitol and D.C. police response was among the topics of a recent House hearing, which broke down into allegations, denials, and partisan bickering. It's also the hearing where a Georgia Republican compared rioters to tourists. And there's simply no way to address shortcomings in the National Guard response without getting deep into top Trump officials at the Pentagon and the White House. Unanswered question number two, how did the riot come together and who planned it? That gets harder to answer when Republicans like Senator Ron Johnson say it was a peaceful event except for a few agitators. And while criminal investigations into rioters might provide more information on quasi-militia groups like the Proud Boys and their role in organizing some rioters, they won't probe how those threats grew and spread or how to prevent it from happening again. Which brings us to some unanswered questions that simply cannot be answered without a commission, and certainly not by lawmakers, including, did any lawmakers help riot leaders? This one also feels like a no-brainer when one party won't even take action against their members who harass others or are likely to face criminal indictment. Put another way, do you know the names Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks, or Paul Gosar? Most Americans don't. But one of the organizers of the January 6th rally named them as helping him plan the rally. Did they also help the rally turn into a riot? Congress has not and likely will not ask. Which brings up another necessary and obvious question. What did Trump do or not do to stop the riot? The only way we'll get answers to that is to put Trump under oath. And given his penchant for lying, you'd all but need to put some of his top aides and advisors under oath as well, including, of course, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, whose phone call with Trump as the riot was happening, and Trump's response that the rioters, quote, are more concerned about the election than McCarthy was, would speak to Trump's disinterest in stopping the violence. Which brings up the final big unanswered question. Why was the response from the highest levels so different when it came to Black Lives Matter protests compared to the response to the riot? There's no question the responses were different, from the show of force to the use of irritants against the BLM crowd, but not at the Capitol, to the use of helicopters. The overreaction to the protests may have impacted decision-making about the riot, but so might the political orientations of the people at the center of each, or the political reactions to each. or that Donald Trump thought cracking down on BLM made him look good, while the rioters sought to keep him in office. Yet another set of Trump-related questions neither law enforcement nor Congress seem prepared to answer. Rich?
Andrew, thank you. And joining us now for his perspective, former Democratic congressman and a one-time member of Democratic leadership from New York, Joe Crowley. Joe, you saw a lot of crazy you-know-what when you were on the Hill, but did you ever think it could get this insane where, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, don't get smacked on the wrist as quickly as a Liz Cheney because she's not lying, and here we are debating about having a commission after the Capitol was attacked. You can't make this up, but I'm just wondering, for a guy who called Congress home as long as you did, how do you look at this and make any sense of it?
Well, Richard, I don't really recognize much of the Republican Party today. It is not the grand old party, the GOP, that I knew back when I was serving in the House. And look, it got pretty frayed there near the end of my career in the House of Representatives in terms of bipartisanship. But I have to say, I do not recognize the same Kevin McCarthy. That's not the same person I used to know. And when you talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene, there is nothing holding her back at this point. There's nothing they can take away from her except for her seat, quite frankly, right now. For the things that she has said this week, reprehensible about someone wearing a vaccine, some kind of pendant that they indicates they were vaccinated, equating that to forcing the Jewish people in Nazi Germany to wear the Star of David. It is so outrageous. But then again, she says such outrageous things to begin with. And there's really, if Kevin McCarthy wanted to discipline her, he really can't discipline her. That's what it's come down to. One of the most tragic and I think one of the darkest days in our nation's history was January 6th of this year. And I don't think we've come to full terms with that yet. Certainly Kevin McCarthy hasn't. And I just think it's tragic what's happened to the GOP.
I spoke to a couple of your former colleagues, and even the ones that usually aren't flamethrowers here, they said, I'm telling you, Rich, I got real questions if some of the guys on the other side of the aisle who were giving these guys tours, who only 2 days later were showing up, storming the building, if they didn't actually give them intel of the ground floor. I wonder if there's some Republican colleagues who dealt with some of these fringe outfits. The fact that they're sharing an actual floor of Congress with these people, that they're refusing to even go through metal detectors or wear a mask or won't even have a commission to figure out what happened, give an idea, as someone who's personally impacted, let alone your constituents on 9/11, that the 9/11 Commission wasn't just about gotcha and figure out where we dropped the ball, but it helped with our intelligence. We stopped stovepiping, or at least got better at not, working against American self-interest. There's a point to these things more than figuring out, who worked against America that day. We're a better country for it if we do this right.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that. I know, for one, that I continued to take instruct from the 9/11 Commission when it came to trade legislation, when it came to a multitude on national homeland security, the creation of of Homeland Security. There were just so many things that we learned from 9/11 that Commission helped us work through. And I do think that the Republicans in the House are fooling themselves if they think that somehow their actions or what happened are not going to come out. There will be The FBI is they are conducting an investigation. There are criminal investigations going on. But somehow to say there won't be any further investigations by the House and Senate is just ludicrous. There will be a commission established of some sorts by the House and by the Senate. And so I think that they should participate. I think they should really, if they want to have any input and impact on how that commission evolves and really moves forward, they should support this.
Can we also dispel with this BS that it's, everybody does it, in that, imagine for a minute, and you were in Democratic leadership, the speaker going to you, hey, Joe, don't push for a commission here because I want to have my conversation with the president on that day to come out, or we might have a couple nut jobs here that did some stuff with these fringe groups. Go along to get along and don't say anything. You never would have signed on to that, nor would your colleagues. And by the way, Chris Shade's a good friend of the show. He never would have bought into this. This is a new phenomenon we haven't seen in government. We have one political party that has become unrecognizable.
Well, as we know, there are Republicans who are supportive of the commission, aside from Liz Cheney. 35 Republicans, including Liz Cheney, voted in favor of the establishment of the commission in the House. We know that there are at least 4 Republicans in the Senate who have come out publicly in support of a commission. They might like to see some tweaks done to the legislation in the House. That's fine. They can work that out. But it's getting to those 6 additional ones in the Senate to establish this. But let's be clear. There is Republican support, very minimal, for a bipartisan commission. But as my good friend and former colleague Tim Ryan said, in order to have a functioning democracy, and a 2-party democracy, you need both parties to be living in some form of reality. And the GOP that I see today are not living in reality. They're living in an alternative universe when it comes to what happened on January 6th of this year.
And yet, the Republican Party that I grew up with was told was a law and order party. They couldn't even do the decency to honor the Capitol Police. And I got some of these clowns saying that it was as if tourists were coming through that day when we all saw what it was like, and we saw what happened to the cops and how many cops were injured.
Yeah, in fact, the craziest thing to come out was the Oversight Committee hearing that happened a week and a half ago, where one of the Republicans had said that it was like any other normal day on Capitol Hill. Far from it. That same Republican was barring the door from that mob coming into the chamber, into the House chamber. This was nothing like anything I'd ever seen in my years of protest on Capitol Hill. There were many hundreds of protests almost daily on Capitol Hill. Nothing ever rose to this level, even remotely to this level. And that's why this needs to be investigated. That's why we need to have this investigation, not to really point blame, but to find out what happened. But when you have a president who would not even acknowledge the deaths of those police officers, would not even go to their viewing when it was on the Capitol, I think it was obscene that former President Trump would not come back to the Capitol and at least give the respect due to those police officers who died as a result of the attack on the Capitol that day.
One more thing on this. There was a recent poll out that showed just a slight majority of people that wanted the commission, because the other choice was, well, the FBI or DOJ is going to do their own probe. It's not the same thing. They don't have subpoena power. Can you explain to the audience why it's important, not just optically, but practically, why Congress owns this investigation?
Well, twofold. One, the FBI is conducting an investigation, and a criminal investigation at that. And they may find cause to bring criminal indictments against possibly sitting members of Congress. We don't know what that investigation will lead to. We just simply don't know. It may lead to that happening as well. But what a commission will do would examine, without calling for a criminal indictment, the ability to bring people before the House and command and demand that they testify, including the former president, including other former members of the cabinet, as well as the armed forces, and to testify as to what they knew, when they knew when the insurrection was happening, and also to create up a system of command so that when there is a need for a response to the Capitol, it doesn't happen like it did on January 6th this year again, that we prevent something like this from happening ever again in our nation's future.
Joe, always good
Thanks,
talking
Rich.
to you. Thank you.
Thanks, my friend. Good to see you.
You too. All right, folks, when we come back, there has been a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. I'm going to show you just how bad this has been getting, and also speak with a leader in the Jewish community about what can be done to stop the hate.